All right, folks, grab your keys, your wallet, your phone, and let your friends know to meet you at the club. Welcome to Behind the Scenes with the Unlocking the Club podcast. We're just about to get started right now. On today's episode of Behind the Scenes with the Unlocking the Club podcast, we'll be joined by Juju Hook. Juju is a brand strategist and author with over 30 years of experience with helping products, businesses, and messages launch, grow, and gain traction. She spent 10 years as a corporate marketing executive, 15 years as a branding agency owner and strategist, and for the past 7 years has been a coach, consultant, and ghostwriter for entrepreneurs with values-based brands. Juju is a champion for women and all who identify as such, and a fierce opponent of society's ugly lie that the older we get, the less we're worth. In 2022, after 2 decades in the making, Juju will embark on the endless summer, a plan she envisioned with her husband YAWN. And during their endless summer, Juju will be writing and working from locations around the globe, chasing sunshine, smiles, and new cultural adventures. Get ready to go behind the scenes with Juju Hook. Hello. My name is Angela Taylor, and I'm your host for Unlocking the Club, a podcast that is launching this June. And as we move toward the launch, I actually wanted to share some of the various aspects of building a podcast from start to finish. And I've learned so much over the last several months when I decided to launch my second podcast. One of the things that I learned was that you cannot do it alone. And so I had my team of allies, some amazing individuals who are subject matter experts, brilliant creatives, and bright spirits and souls who helped me to unlock my vision for what the Unlocking the Club podcast would be. So as a way to give you guys a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, I wanted to invite you in on the journey. So welcome to Behind the Scenes with the Unlocking the Club podcast. Today, I'm actually really excited to be in conversation with someone who did, in fact, help bring that vision of unlocking the club to life. Now, when I started this journey, it was going to be a podcast literally about golf, about my foibles and fumbles on the golf course. And it's evolved into something that I'm really excited about. So I want to welcome Juju Hook, who is a brand strategist, a ghostwriter, and an author of the book Hot Flashes, Carpools, and Dirty Martinis. We're going to have to find out a little bit about that book and the inspiration for that when we talk to Juju. But I also want to let you know that it's no coincidence that Juju is our first guest on Behind the Scenes with Unlocking the Club. But it's, again, been quite a journey and a process. And something that Juju did was to help me lean in, to help me actually go for it. And not just dip my toe in the water to tell some stories, but to go big. And what Juju was able to help me do was unlock who I am and who I want to be and who I want to serve through these podcasts. And that is a caretaker of people, a caretaker of ideas, and a caretaker of stories. And that hopefully will allow me to have a podcast that impacts not just those who are listening, but the guests as well. So I'm eternally grateful to Juju for being part of this journey and really excited to be in this conversation today, peeling back the curtain on branding, like something that we all, whether it's our personal brand or a brand for our business, we all can really understand better. So without further ado, it is really an honor and a pleasure to invite in the person behind the scenes and helping build the brand strategy for Unlocking the Club. Juju, welcome to Behind the Scenes with Unlocking the Club. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, first, we'd love for the audience, we kind of gave your bio. It's really interesting bio, some interesting books, titles, and certainly this journey that you're about to head on with YAWN. But tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you've been doing.
So I have always been a brand strategist. Because my first job out of college was a marketing job. My undergraduate degree's in writing, and it was really early on in my 20s that I recognized that I had a knack for messaging and for organizing thoughts and organizing concepts and ideas into words that people could understand. So I spent the first, 10 years of my career in the financial industry. Was not a good fit for me. Got great results, but I was a little bit of a loose cannon. So I never fit in on the executive team. And then I ran my own agency for many years, and I loved it. I had a boutique branding agency. I had creative teams from all over the world. It was really awesome. And the two industries that I served most were banking and automotive. And then when I got close to 50, I started to have a lot of those feelings that women start to feel, right, around midlife. And I just really longed for something more. And so I left the agency, and I started to help midlife women launch businesses and brands. And it was really, really just a huge shift in terms of purpose and meaning in my life. And that's when I wrote the book, Hot Flashes, Carpools, and Dirty Martinis. And so for the last 5 years, I've been helping all different kinds of entrepreneurs to bring their messages and their brands to life.
All right, so Hot Flashes, Carpools, and Dirty Martinis.
Yeah.
How'd you come up with that title? What is that title?
So, I was a little late to the parenting game. I didn't get pregnant until I was 34. And so I was in menopause by the time our son was in puberty. And, menopause and puberty go together like beer and ice cream, right? It's really not at all a good thing. And so by the time I decided to make a change in my life and my career, I was really struggling with a sense of irrelevance and, wondering if my ship had kind of sailed. And so I spent a lot of time with a bottle of Pinot Noir. And, it just was, it just was a time of real, I think, self-doubt. And I had a moment when I recognized that I was really in my prime, that now is when I have really achieved mastery, and that my best years were ahead. And so I had to sort of relaunch myself. I had to pivot.
So I love that you talk about, as you continue to understand who you are on your journey, right, you can really lean into what it is that you're passionate about. That self-doubt, while it never truly goes away, right, it also gives you an opportunity to have more clarity. I want to kind of go back a little bit earlier. You talked about when you were working in the financial industry, like it wasn't a good fit. Terrible fit. Well, it sounds like literally like it was a club that you didn't fit in. What were some of the components? How did you know that that wasn't the club that you belonged in or that you wanted to be in?
So interestingly enough, I was successful and always in trouble. So it was a really strange, right? Like I always hit my numbers, and everybody knew that they could come to me to get the job done. And I think I was wholly reliable, and I got it, but I didn't really want to play office politics. And I needed to, I had a hard time holding my tongue in terms of not saying and contributing what I really thought. And it was an environment. I mean, first of all, it was all 60-year-old men, right? And me, I was in my 20s. I can remember board meetings where we would have the chairman of the board introduce the executive team, and they would say, here, this is the vice president of finance, and this is vice president of operations, and this is Julia Hook. She's our marketing gal, right? And I was vice president of marketing. So it was just an environment where I felt trapped. I felt I couldn't be who I wanted to be, and it was hard for me to extract myself from it because I had worked so hard to get there, and then I had built my life around the income. So it felt irresponsible to walk away and go do my own thing. It took me a long time, probably longer than it should have.
Yeah. Well, and like that all fuels that self-doubt, right? That shows
Yes,
up for you.
of course.
Like, can I have a family that I'm responsible for? I'm making a good income. Like, right, I'm doing what people expected me to do. I have this degree and I'm making the most of it. All those different stories that we tell ourselves, which is actually what I think for Black women in particularly shows up quite a bit, Juju.
Yeah.
And I think just because of the nature of the beast, because you oftentimes are the caretaker in your families for everything. Everyone comes to you, and you have to portray this sense of strength and independence that we don't allow ourselves to actually tell those stories or acknowledge those stories. And we make those moments where we don't feel good, that self-doubt about ourselves, that we're less than or not good enough, versus the system or the structure that just isn't welcoming to us or built for us or inviting us in. And so I get curious, based on your story and your journey. I think there's so many reasons that you were helpful to me in this process. But was it your personal journey that allowed you to help me actually figure out what this could be and the creative process?
I think so. Yeah. I grew up with 6 brothers. And so I never really fit into the club at my own house. And I
Wow.
think the choices that I made about my early career were all about validation and all about me sort of trying to prove myself in certain ways. And in doing that, I denied myself, the opportunity to do what I loved and be who I was. And by the time I was, pushing 50 and having yet another pivot, it was really clear to me that I wasn't going to do it again. And so, especially working with women who are sort of midlife, who have mastery, and there really often comes this desire, right? I want to contribute more. I want to contribute on another level. I want to make change. I want to give back now. And I think, having gone through it myself, it's a much easier seat for me to sit in now, to say to women, hey, listen, let's lay it all on the table, right? Let's find out what it is that you really want and see how we can get there.
Yeah. What was beautiful about how you orchestrated this, that it didn't feel like a process at all. It actually just felt like conversations, a myriad of conversations that we were able to have over the course of 2 or 3 months. And it really did unlock this thing that every time I leaned in, after every conversation I'd have with Juju, right, I was up in the middle of the night just jotting notes or these thoughts that were just percolating, because it was going to another place that I was really excited about the potential. Can you share like what your creative process actually is and your involvement in the Unlocking the Club podcast?
Yeah, sure, of course. So, interestingly enough, branding is branding, right? So I didn't invent that. It's something that I learned early on, and every brander learns that, brands have elements, right? They have differentiators, what makes you unique and different, and they have goals and objectives and specific target audiences and very clear messages and personalities and visual identities. And what I find is that for corporations, it's pretty easy for that to be distant from the heart or distant from the soul. But when you're talking about human beings who are running companies or producing shows, it's all one. And so branding becomes an act of bravery. On a number of levels. First of all, because you have to show yourself honestly, and if you don't show yourself honestly, people will know, and it doesn't catch on. But secondly, because once you make a choice, everything else falls away. Once you decide these are the people I'm going to talk to, or these are the people I'm going to serve, and this is how I'm going to be different, and this is how I'm going to pitch myself and position myself, then it feels like you lose touch with all the other options, and that's a gutsy thing to do. So the process that I use for branding is exactly the same as it was in corporate branding in terms of all the questions I have to answer. But the way it works from a relationship standpoint is totally different, because it is just a series of conversations. And it's a distillation process, right? I mean, when you and I first started to talk, and you were talking about golf.
Exactly.
And it was this really impactful conversation, because you were talking about being on the golf course, but you were talking about being a Black woman on the golf course. So it wasn't really about golf. It was about the experience that you were having trying to golf, right? Or being a golfer. And so when I ask questions, right? Well, what's that about? Well, tell me how that felt. Well, what did that mean to you? then things sort of start to rise, right? Things come up, you know, and it's this really interesting process of distillation of what's really going on here, right? And what's the message? And I think you had a lot of moments where it was like, oh yeah, it is about that, right? And it's really common to watch folks come to a moment when you decide, oh, this is what I want to talk about. This is how I'm gonna position this, and then to go off and have feelings of terror, right? Like what is anybody even believe me when I say that? And can I really say that out loud? And is that really true?
I'm glad it wasn't.
Yeah. Is that really true? And am I really qualified for that? And all, you know, because it's a stretch to show yourself that way, and to be vulnerable in a sense of saying out loud, this is what I want to bring to the world. So I think that being able to hold people in that space is the joy of my career now versus what I was doing before.
Wow. And there were a lot of moments of terror. Let me tell you.
Yeah, there always are.
And there were more to come. I guarantee you, as I look at the enormity of wanting to launch this podcast and why and what I'm hoping to accomplish through it. But you said something about the departure from your heart and departure from your soul that really resonated with me. And I'm curious of, you know, where my vision started to where it currently is. Like, I know that I'm acutely aware of what our strategy sessions unlocked in me for this podcast, but just period. Like, right, as a storyteller, about the opportunities and the moments I had with my mother where we were sharing our stories and connecting with one another. Yeah. And you and I haven't talked about this yet, but I'm curious what your sense of the evolution has been and what it symbolizes for you as a strategist, a brand strategist.
And your evolution?
Yeah, of either the concept and or of the person, the human behind the concept.
You know, I think it's really interesting that you and I talked a lot about the concept of club, right? And about fitting in, or about claiming your space, or about standing outside of things. And this idea of not really ever feeling like I totally belong here, or I totally belong here. And I think that's a universal feeling among humans, but I have come to understand that it's really a primary feeling for Black women, right? That this is something that's present in your life and in agitating, right, all the time. Yeah. And that's the conversation, right? That's the thing to get to, and it's also all the vulnerability. So for me to see that and to have you revisit it again and again in conversation, and then to ask, is this what this is about, right? And then to see the hesitation, I know in the moment, that's where we're going, right? That's where we need to go. Because the way that you feel about it, the way that you feel hesitant about it, is the same way everyone who's listening to you feels about it. And that's why you got to talk about it. And that's why you're the one. That's why you're the one to do it.
I hope so. I really do hope so. Again, excited for this journey for a lot of different reasons. And when we got to the concept of unlocking the club, right, there's a lot of different things that we played around with the naming. It was the club that was where we started, literally and figuratively, the golf club. But again, this reclaiming, this revealing, this opening the gates. And I wonder for you, particularly in PR or marketing and the publishing industry. I just read the book American Dirt, and I know there was that controversy behind that with Oprah's book choice and who has the right to tell whose stories.
Yes.
I wonder for you, from your lens, what does the concept of unlocking the club mean around public relations, PR, communications, marketing, etc.?
You know, it's really interesting, this concept of belonging. And I think, too, one of the things that the most interesting conversation around branding and around public relations is the difference between the way I see myself, or the way I understand my story or my journey, and the way other people perceive it, right? And so oftentimes, and it works both ways, right? So from the outside, people may very easily be looking at you and saying, okay, well, you're right, she went to Stanford and she played basketball and she's been, an executive in the WNBA and been on TV and all these things, right? Like, you're in the club, if from the outside looking in. But then when I'm inside your head and inside your heart, right, I'm hearing all of your questions about, do I belong or don't I belong? And where do I fit in and how far do I go? And I think that reconciling that external image with that internal story is that's what public relations and marketing is all about. Yeah. And it works both ways too, right? Sometimes we feel, sometimes we have an inner story or an inner confidence or something we know about ourselves that's really outstanding or really next level. And other people can't see it because we've been taught not to say it out loud, right? Don't brag, don't own it, don't be boastful, and especially for women. Yeah. And so I think that sort of disparity between how I see myself and how other people see me in either direction is really what it's all about. And that's all I do all day long is help close that gap.
Well, you definitely helped to close the gap for me, and I appreciate it. I also, you mentioned earlier your journey where you started, and that oftentimes you were the only, woman in a room of 60-year-old white men. And then I think about the concept of unlocking these stories from a marketing or PR standpoint. And I recall, like, every time I go to a design firm's website and I'm scrolling through their team and the images, oftentimes it's a roster of white men and maybe some white women and then maybe some other identities represented. And so if we really do want to be able to unlock all these stories, what's the passcode?
That's really interesting. I mean, I think for me, I spend all my time telling other people's stories now, whether I'm telling them in my voice or their voice. I'm ghostwriting as well. For me, it's trust. I have to find a way to get people to trust me, right? And it's the only way that I can be worthy of trust, right, is to give trust first and to show a certain degree of vulnerability and honesty, in my own life and my own journey, and to stay in it, right? To be willing to, I think, consider the possibility of rejection, right? That maybe this isn't going to work. Maybe this client isn't going to want me, or maybe this isn't going to go the way I think it's going to go, or maybe I'm going to get embarrassed, or maybe I'm going to get shut out. And I will be resilient enough to bounce back and to know that I still have what it takes and to go do it again. And I think that for me, that's been the passcode, right? Is just this willingness to put myself out there and take the knocks. And what I have found is that the further I step out and the more honest I am, the fewer knocks I take. So it's really counterintuitive, right? But for me, and I don't know that that's everybody's code, but for me, that's definitely been the case.
Well, we can have more Jujus in that particular industry, it will be a better place, because that's what's going to be required, right? Is valuing and prioritizing, right, folks that have been at the margins inside of these stories, for sure. You mentioned being vulnerable, and earlier on you talked a lot about your journey to actually starting to highlight and support brands that are founded by women over 50.
Yeah.
And as a woman over 50, and after Oprah, made 50 feel different years ago, like, I think we all own it much differently now. But you're actually about to embark on a really, really incredibly exciting journey yourself, the endless summer. So how does your plan for life at 55 support your role as a brand strategist for powerful women of any age?
So, the endless summer is my husband, YAWN, and I married a guy from Germany when I was in my early 30s. We worked together. I lost my job. So, that was also really interesting, right? I left my job for love, which is kind of a little bit of a cliche, right? But true.
Yeah.
And since the time that we met, we've been talking about getting to a point in our lives where we could just travel. And so I have been looking and searching for a way that I can sort of globetrot and not lose touch with my ability to earn and my ability to make a difference in the world and to stay busy, to stay, it's easy to think that at a certain point you kind of want to chill. I hear women say that. They tell me that, right? Like, oh, I've been working so long and I can't wait to the point where I can just chill. But average age for a woman, lifespan for a woman in America is over 80 years old. Yeah. So if you decide at 50 you're going to chill, that's a long time.
We're middle age.
Really apply yourself to anything, right? And then if you're with another human, this is what makes you exciting. Is the experiences that you're having there challenging you on a daily basis. So I had to figure that out. And the coaching and the writing and the getting to that, I can do that anywhere. Mm-hmm. And so we're just getting ready, just in a week. We're starting the first time. We take a month-long trip first, and then we take another month-long trip, and then we rest for a bit, and then we have a 5-month trip.
Well, it sounds like you literally are reclaiming Juju in this moment and redoing choices and decisions that you made previously around your career. And I think that, COVID, we wouldn't wish it on anyone. The last couple of years we've all been going through, but it also has enlightened us to thinking differently and disrupting the ways that we went about our day-to-day process. Mm-hmm. When you think about this journey that you're about to go on, I feel like you have a really interesting vantage point on this community we're trying to build. Because you're part of this community that I'm in, and it's been so gratifying to be able to get to know you over the last couple of years.
Likewise.
Well, thank you. And not just around the work, but just the journey that we're all on. And you and I have talked a lot for the Unlocking the Club podcast about the community. It's not just about those conversations, but it's also about the community that intending and hoping to be able to build. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, what do you envision for this community that we're building?
Yeah, I think the opportunity here is amazing. I mean, you and I have talked about the idea of how interesting is it to belong to a community that's about the feelings of belonging or not belonging, right? It's really at the core of the human experience, and definitely at the core of the experience of, people who are on the margins, right? So I think that in and of itself makes it a really unique community. It starts at the heart level. It starts at the vulnerability level. But I also think it gives an opportunity for people to literally come together in spaces, right? We've talked about you going around and golfing with people or meeting people different places, right? And how many conversations have we had around potential guests and them bringing their audiences together, right? That where you're building this really diverse community around a shared feeling, a shared emotion. And I think there's power in that beyond even what you understand right now. Mm-hmm. I think it's, affinities, right? There's all kinds of affinity communities, and I've built scores of them over my lifetime, right? For brands. Here's people who ski and, we talked about, people who golf, right? But that's completely different than saying, here's a whole group of people who at one time or another, at very important moments in their life, have wondered if they were going to get in or be kicked out or have their hearts broken or feel denied or rejected. And that's a really substantial connection.
Yeah. No, for sure. I can't tell you how many times that I was the only woman or the only person of color in a boardroom, right? And you feel alone as you're moving your way up the corporate ladder, if you will. And so often you hear from others that they feel like you are alone. And that sense of finding and discovering that you aren't, there's others that have different but similar lived experiences is really refreshing. And so I agree, hoping that that is something that we can foster through this journey.
I think also for women, we're taught from a very young age that there's only a certain number of seats at the table, right? So you have to fight for it. You got to get there. You got to get your seat. And that makes it dicey sometimes or complex around relationships with other women, because you don't really always know how to reach down, right, and pull someone else up, and how to hold what you have and what you worked for, right, and at the same time share it with everybody else. And I think that's a challenge right now for a lot of women, right? It's a challenge in feminism in general, right? Are all women included? Yes. And so I think these questions for women, especially women of an age where, you know, you've sort of matured into understanding this is what I want for my life, or this is what I can get from my career. Now, how do I turn around and give this access or share what I have with other women? And I don't know that that's always a question that we're taught to ask.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, that's a whole nother episode. I'm going to have you back to unpack the episode a little bit. And I think we were intentional actually kind of around that conversation of once we started to narrow in on who I wanted this conversation to include, and for it to be centered around Black women particularly, or women of color. We also talked about like allies, like other identities, male and female and other races and ethnicities, coming to listen and listen deeply so that you can actually validate and listen and believe those stories that we're going to share. And what you said reminded me of years ago when I was working with the WNBA League office. We had launched this platform called Inspiring Women. And one of the first speakers we had at the luncheon was Madeleine Albright. Recently passed away. And an audience member during the Q&A asked her a question of mentors she had. And I think people were presuming that she would say, you know, a list of all these women. And she said, honestly, women, everyone in this room, you need to listen here, right? Oftentimes we get in each other's way.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's an insecurity, there's this being threatened by one another, and the sense of there's only room for one of us. So it's a zero-sum game.
Exactly right.
And she said, some of my best mentors and advocates have been men, and that shouldn't be the way it is. And so hopefully that is one of the things that we create, certainly through this podcast. And I appreciate you for kind of helping me start to see that and understand that that is at the core of what I wanted to be able to create from this. As you all can see, Juju and I can have conversations for hours at a time. This is literally like what it was inside of those moments as we were preparing for the podcast. And this has really been a lot of fun. I want to thank you for joining us today for Behind the Scenes, Unlocking the Club. But before we wrap up, we're not quite done yet. We have a little segment Unlocking the Club that I want to introduce today, and that's called the Back Nine. Literally about an experience that we all have on the golf course when, for some of us, are shaking a lot of balls. So coming out of this break, I'm going to have send Juju through a quick rapid fire Back Nine. We'll be right back. All right, Juju.
I'm ready.
Ready? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So just setting this up, the Back Nine is kind of a concept to bring in that golf concept and that connection. And if you're playing a full round of 18, for me, my experience is those first 9 holes, like I don't play often enough that I'm shaking balls, like I'm just getting my rhythm. And by the time I get to the Back Nine, that stretch, I'm moving a lot quicker, right? I'm not overthinking the game, and I'm actually playing a little bit better. So in honor of that, we are going to have this segment called the Back Nine. I'm going to do some 9 rapid fire questions for Juju, starting out with, besides the Unlocking the Club podcast, what's your favorite podcast, Juju?
Oh my gosh, I love true crime podcasts.
Love it.
So I listen to all different kinds of probably stuff that keeps me up at night.
Yeah. I imagine you hear some of those things, like, right? And you're like, I can't. This is really happening. Some of these stories.
Yes. Some of them are absolutely nuts. Yeah.
No, I can imagine that. I don't know if I can handle that. Right? I wouldn't get my rest. Knowing that, like, you're keeping yourself up at night. What do you do to center yourself?
I do yoga and meditation. And I think more than anything, I'm really in touch with the fact that my thoughts are not reality, that they're not truth. So sometimes centering myself is just around the question, is that true?
Such a powerful question, right?
Yeah.
We all could just use that every now and then just to reset.
Yeah, you can't believe everything you think.
Yeah, what's true for me? What's true for
Yeah.
the situation? Sure. What have you learned about yourself in the last couple of years as we've navigated COVID? And
I have learned that I'm not as much of an extrovert as I thought I was.
interesting.
I used to really dread being alone with myself, being alone with my thoughts.
Yeah.
And now I really enjoy it.
Yes. I think that's one of those, when you turn 50, you actually do enjoy those moments, the peace and the serenity with oneself. No, I agree with you wholeheartedly there. What's one item on your bucket list? And for somebody who's traveling the world here in a couple of bags, what's on your bucket list?
I want to go to a Formula One race.
Interesting.
I have always wanted to. I have always wanted to get to be next to a Formula One race. I've always been drawn to it, and we're going to go. This is something we're going to do in the fall. But yeah, it's a very, very big bucket list item for me. And I've always wanted to drive a kind of a race car. So that's also a bucket list, to go to, like, Bob Bondurant School of Driving or something like that, and drive fast.
Awesome. Okay, learning a lot about you, Juju. Okay. so the moments, like some peace and serenity, and then the loudness.
Let's go. Yeah, exactly.
Well, when you go to your Formula One race and you have reservation at a 5-star restaurant, including yourself, and you have a reservation for 4, who are the other 3 guests, living or deceased, that you'd like to invite to dinner?
Oh man, Tina Turner. I've always wanted to have a conversation with Tina Turner. In fact, when I was in MBA school, that they asked this question, who would you have a conversation with, living and dead? And everyone was like, Gandhi or, right, George Washington. And I said Tina Turner, and everyone looked at me like I was nuts. I have to honestly say that if I was going to have a really interesting conversation, I would take my husband. I think he's best, in a conversation. I get 3 or 4 people. Barack Obama.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe this is going to sound crazy, but maybe Barbara Walters. And the only reason is because she's met everyone, right? And so I feel like there's an opportunity to kind of really pick a brain there, right? What was so-and-so like? What was so-and-so like? I know she had her issues, but I have a feeling she'd be good in conversation.
Absolutely, right? Like the depth of that discussion and discourse.
Yeah, and talk about somebody who was in the club, right? Or in rooms where we all didn't get to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. I like it. All right, so Barbara Walters, Tina Turner, YAWN.
Obama, and YAWN.
Nice. All right, I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that dinner conversation for sure. What do you do in your pastime?
In my free time?
Yeah.
I read a ton. Huge reader. I probably read a book a week. Yeah. I walk. We live on the coast, and we do coffee walks. So oftentimes we'll get up early in the morning, drive to a coffee shop. We'll get a cup of coffee. We'll walk down the coast and get cups of coffee as we go. So that really is my favorite thing to do, is walk around. And that's what we do when we travel, is walk a city section by section.
Oh, that's awesome. That just sounds like more compelling now, I have to tell you, than probably before COVID. Right? Like, I appreciate those moments, like, and maybe not for you, but for me, like those quiet moments of just being with oneself or with someone in a conversation. Yeah, I love that.
I think also I think I'm kinder to my body than I used to be. And so walking is something that feels good, and it helps me get stronger, but I don't have to break myself down in order to do it. So it suits where I'm at in life right now.
That makes sense. That makes sense for sure. So we've talked a lot about branding. What's one piece of advice that you would give folks that are listening today?
For those who own businesses, they're running businesses, and I guess those who are advancing in careers as well, I would encourage you to be able to answer the question, why would someone choose me out of all the people on the planet? It's the $1 million question, right? Why would someone choose me? And once you can answer that question, then generally you can communicate what you need to your target audience.
Yeah. And what's important in that space is what is true for you, what is true, right, to really understand and be okay with being able to say what is true.
Yeah.
Well, as we get ready to wrap up, what projects, beside from being this digital nomad and traveling the world, what project are you currently working on?
I am currently finishing ghostwriting a book for an entrepreneur about how to manage remote teams. Super exciting, timely topic right now. And it's somebody that is releasing a software product. So I'm really excited about that too. I have a couple of women clients who are, you included, Angela, who are sort of redefining themselves and showing the world who they are, which is, super exciting. And I have this travel project that takes up at least a third of my working time of, where am I going to go next and what's it going to be like and what do you bring and, how do we do it all in a single carry-on bag and super riveting, important questions like that.
That's awesome. Well, Juju, again, I know you're incredibly busy. I know that you are in the process of packing for your trip.
I am.
And packing lightly, which I don't even understand that concept of whatever that could possibly be. But I want to thank you again for being part of this process and this journey with me.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And being on behind the scenes with Unlocking the Club podcast. This has been a lot of fun, and hopefully we'll have you back and have another conversation about your journey and how you unlocked the club over in Europe and in Formula One racing and all the other things. And I consider these conversations that you and YAWN will have as you are doing your coffee walks along the way. Again, Juju Hook, Brand Strategist, Ghostwriter and Author, and part of the team of allies for the Unlocking the Club podcast. Thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Angela.
Thanks for listening to Unlocking the Club. If this conversation resonated with you, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or your favorite platform so that you can experience every episode. And follow us on social, where you'll be the first to know the latest news on our lineup of guests, as well as more interviews and insights between episodes. Until next time, let's unlock the club.